Hello, I'm David Bowman, Director of New Mexico REC1 up in the Four Corners region. This is a repeat of yesterday's session, the first session for using Excel to understand student data. Unfortunately, the video yesterday did not record after I had a little computer problem, so I'm going to basically walk through again or remake the video that goes over the concepts and the strategies and techniques that we looked at yesterday. Uh, Fortunately, this will probably take quite a bit less time than what we actually did during the session. We'll be able to go through the various steps easily, and since you're watching the video, I won't need to go back over the actions because you can simply go back a little bit in the video and see them again that way. So, with that being said, let's jump into Excel, and I'm starting with the sample spreadsheet called Sample Data Big. Now, the first thing that we talked about yesterday was how do we actually format our spreadsheets so that they are useful to us, and what are some of the techniques that we can use to navigate more easily around spreadsheets. So that's where we will start. Okay, with that being said, let's first take a look at the first row up here. Now, these are all headings for columns, but as you can see, we actually cannot read most of them because they're buried. Basically, the titles are too long for the cells. So we're going to fix that first. Now, the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to simply select that entire row, row 1 across the top. And to do that, I'm going to pull my cursor all the way over to the right side, to the left side, to number 1. And you see it turns into a little arrow. It's right there blinking. So I'm going to click and select all of that at once. And then I'm going to right click anywhere in the highlighted area to pull up my little menu. And you will see that there's an option called Format Cells, which I will use. Now, we've got a variety of tabs, but I'm going to go to the Alignment tab and select Wrap Text. And OK. Now I can see what I'm looking at. I can actually see all of those headings going across. Now, just as I scroll a bit, using my arrow key, I see that there are some columns that have no data in them. So we're not going to use them for analysis. I want to just get them out of the way and hide them so that they're not basically cluttering up my screen, and I can focus on the data and the information that I need. So I'm going to click up here on G, and while I'm clicking, I'm going to hold and just drag across to highlight all of those columns, and then right click. Now this time, instead of choosing Format Cells, I will choose Hide. So they're still there, but I'm hiding them. They're right there between columns F and O. Now the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to resize some of these columns. I see down here in Q, which is Diagnostic Start Date, and over here in R, there's a bunch of little crosshatches. What that means is there's more information in there than can be displayed. So I need to expand those columns a little bit so that I can see what they say. And I'm going to click on Q and drag over to R. And then when I put my cursor right between Q and R, the cursor changes to a little back and forth arrow sign. And when I click on that and drag a little bit, it's going to resize both of those columns so that now I can actually see the information that's in there. And we probably have the same thing, over here again on Y and Z, so I'm going to do the same thing over here. Highlight both, click and drag right in the middle to expand it. And because both of those columns are selected, it's going to expand both of the columns. And there we go. Now, the other thing that I can do is I can do an auto resizing. So we see down here in E, these are school names, and they're a little bit too long to be displayed. So if I go back up here again between E and F, and I double click, Excel will automatically expand the column in order to show what's inside of it. So I'll go up there between them, right where my cursor is, and double click. It automatically expanded it just the amount that it needs in order to reveal what's inside. Okay, so those are some of the things that I would do when I first get started with my spreadsheet. But I do notice that if I scroll, I'm going to lose all of my headers. So, for example, if I scroll here, scroll down, my headers are gone. And yet I need to see those headers because I've got a lot of data, a lot of rows of data here. And when I scroll, I might not remember what those various columns are. So the first thing I'm going to do is here on the View tab at the top, I am going to click on Split. And what this will do is it will split the screen into 4 sections. And you see it's right down the middle and across the middle as well. Well, that's not where I want it to split. I want to only keep the top row. So I'm going to click and drag on this horizontal bar, and I'm going to drag it up right underneath the top row. Now there's also a vertical split in here, and I don't need that one at all. Now I could put it over here by student ID, so that student IDs will always be there even if I scroll across. But for our purposes, we don't need it, so I'm going to simply take that split and just drag it all the way over to the left and let go, just to get rid of it. All right, so now that I've got my split in the place that I want it, right here underneath the headings, now I will click up here in the menu bar on Freeze Panes, and I will simply select Freeze Panes. Now when I scroll, all of those headings stay in place. So we basically created a frame across the top, and we said freeze it there. Don't move. So I can scroll, and now my columns stayed in place. So if I scroll down or if I scroll across, I still know what those columns are all about. Okay, so that's just kind of organizing things a bit to make it more manageable. But there are also a few keyboard shortcuts that I can use to navigate around this spreadsheet. And the most important of these has to do with the end key, end arrow. Now, if you're on a Mac, I solved the question, how do you do it on a Mac if you don't have the end key? You will use the function key instead. Here's how it works. Let's say I want to go all the way across to the very last item on row 1. How do I immediately jump to the end? So, using my end key or function for Macs, I will click the end key, and then I will click the right arrow. So it will go to the end on the right, which I see is down here on column AN. So the end key will take me to the ending point in whichever direction I click an arrow. So to go right back home, Control Home. All right, so the same thing going down. Let's say I want to go all the way down to the last cell before a space in column A. I'm going to go all the way down. So again, I can use my end key. So I click end, and then I click my down arrow to go to the end of the column, which is down there on row 3109, and home key to go back up. Okay, so that makes it very easy to jump to the end of a row or to the end of a column. But let's say I want to select a range. For selecting, I need to use my shift key. So if I hold down and just keep holding down my shift key and then use my arrows, while holding my shift key, I can select a range. Now, here's where it gets really useful. I can combine those two actions together. I want to go to the end of the column and select all of that information. So I'm going to put those two together. Instead of doing end arrow or shift arrow, I'm going to do Shift End Arrow. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key. I'm going to press my End button or function, and then I will do my down arrow. And as you see, it has selected all of the cells all the way down to the bottom. And I can do the same thing going across the top. So let's say I want to select all the way across row 1 to the last cell before a space. I will hold down my Shift, and while I'm holding it, I will press the End key, and then I will press the right arrow, and it selects all the way to the end. So there's a couple reasons why we want to do this. For one, we can use this to format our column headings and so forth. But where it becomes very, very powerful for Excel and for analysis is it allows us to very easily give the selected column or selected row a name. Let me show you what I mean by that. So right here, this is A2. So it's column A, row 2. That one right there. And if we look up here on the upper left, right where my cursor is blinking, I see the name of that cell, which is A2. And wherever I go, it's going to tell me the name. So this cell is called E8 because that's the column in the row reference. But I can give it my own name, which makes it very easy for me later to use it as a part of formulas, for analysis formulas. So let's say, for example, I've got student grades here, and these are all the student grades, right? If I'm going to use student grades as a part of my analysis, I don't want to have to keep typing C2 through C1 3109 or whatever it is. Yep, 3109. I just want to refer to it as student grades because that's the information that's in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it my own name that I can refer back to. And I'm going to use that end arrow function in order to select it all at once. So right now, I have selected C2. And we see the name of that is C2 up there in the upper left-hand corner. So I'm going to start with C2 and then hold my Shift key, press End down to select the whole range. See, there's nothing below it. That's the end. And it goes from the very bottom all the way up to the very top. And I'm going to give that entire range a name. So up here where it says C2 currently, I'm going to simply click there to highlight it, and I'm going to type in student grades. I'm giving a name to that entire range. So whenever I refer to student grades in a formula or otherwise, it's always going to indicate that range of cells, which are the student grades. So one thing I can do is I can simply type up here student grades because it already has a name, right? So there's no risk of giving something else that name. That name is taken now. So if I type it in, student grades, you will see it automatically selects everything in that particular range because that range is called student grades. All right, so let's do the one more of those. So over here we've got, let's see, diagnostic time on task, most recent. So let's say I want to know, I'm thinking ahead, I want to know how much time students spent on one of the assessments. Is that really how long it took? 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 8 minutes? 12, yeah. Some of these kids didn't take very long on the assessment. Okay, so if I know that I'm going to do some analysis around how much time they spent, well, here I'm going to give that entire range a name from the top to the bottom. So I start with the top and I click on it to highlight it, right there. And then Shift, End down. So I've now selected all of the times, all the information about the time spent on the test, and I'm going to give it a name. So I go up here to the name box, and I'm going to put time 1. So whenever I want to do any kind of analysis around the amount of time they spent, all I have to do is refer to time 1, which will be that. Now, just to make it easy for myself to remember what I've called things, I'm going to replace this header over here with the name that I gave it, time 1. So I know that this entire set of data is called time 1. And that's just a little saver, space saver for myself, so I don't have to remember what are all the names. I just go ahead and rename the column. And this one over here, we see I've already called it student grades. So why is this important? Because when we start looking at formulas, very quickly here, we have to say what cells do we want to include in the formulas. And if I have to keep going back to figure out, well, it's this column and this row all the way down to this column and this row, it becomes very complicated and makes it much more likely that I will have an error of some kind. But if I just give it the name, then I don't have to worry about where the cells are specifically. I just have to refer to that name. All right, so you're going to see that as we start looking at formulas, how critically useful that becomes. Now, there was a question yesterday about what happens if you end up adding more rows or adding more kids to your data set. Well, that named range refers to a very specific set of cells, and from one row to the next row. So in this case, row 2 down to row 3109. What happens if you add more? So although this kind of got us into the weeds yesterday, and people were like, wait, this is too much, or not what I need, I'm going to take just a moment and address how do you accommodate when you have additional rows of students. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make another sheet altogether. All right, right now this is called sheet 1. If you look down there in the bottom left, you see the name of the sheet. I'm going to right click on that and select rename, and I'll just call this data. I usually like to put all of my data on one sheet and then all the formulas and all of the results on a different sheet where I can easily access them. So I'm going to create a new sheet, and I'll click this little plus button that says new sheet. Okay. And I'm going to right click on that name of it. I'm going to rename it to results. Okay, and we'll do all of our calculations over here. So the question is, what happens if you add more rows of data, more rows of information? Suddenly, your formulas aren't going to be able to accommodate the new rows because they're not part of the named range. We need the range to be flexible so that if we add or subtract students, the range also expands or contracts. The named range also expands or contracts. And this is going to lead us up to our first formula. The first thing we're going to have to do is we have to answer the question, how many students are included? And fortunately, Excel gives us a very easy way to do that. See, if we look at our data over here, every single row in column A has the information for another student, right? So we can use column A to figure out how many students are included in this data set over here. And as it turns out, it's 3,108. So what we want to do basically is have Excel count the numbers of students. And we can do that very simply. The formula that we're going to use is going to be count. It's called count A. So like any formula, it's going to start off with an equal sign. The value of this cell equals, and then we tell it what it equals. So the command or the formula that we use is called count, because we're counting, A, count A. And what count A does is it says, in the selected range, count all the cells that have something in them. Every cell with something in it, any kind of information in it, will get included in this count. So the formula is called count A for all. Now, like any formula, the very next thing is a parenthesis. Count A is the name of the formula, and now we need to include the parameters for how this formula is going to work. So we want to select all of column A in the other sheet. So while my cursor is still in there, and while I'm still writing this formula, I'm going to click down here on the Data tab, and I'm simply going to click up here on A to select the entire column, just like that, and then enter. 3,109 cells in that range have something in them. Well, that's actually a trap, because we know that that's the number of cells in A that have something in them, but the first cell is not a student, it's a label. So it's actually 3,109 cells minus 1, because we have to accommodate the header up there. So we need to change our formula just a hair to say, okay, we know that there's 3,109 rows or cells with information, but one of those isn't a student, so we have to remove it. Well, it's very simple. All we have to do, we've got our count A of the whole column. Let's just subtract 1. We have 3,108 students, which is a lot. And, it's kind of for me, it's kind of a medium-sized. It's probably going to be more than most folks will need to look at, unless you're looking perhaps at district-wide data, in which case you may have a much larger number. But the point is, we don't have to keep coming up with that number over and over and over again. It's simply Excel will do it for us. So if we add or subtract students, that number is automatically going to adjust. So I'm going to give a name to that cell. Right now the cell is called A2. I'm going to give it my own name. I'm going to simply call it number of students. So you'll see I took number of students and I made it one word basically. When you are giving a name to a cell or to a range, there are some restrictions. You cannot use a number for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the first part of the name. You can't start with the number signs or a special character, and you can't have any spaces in the name either. So I couldn't put like the number 1 and then some name. It has to be a letter. So I'm going to just say number of students, all one word. And it's that right there. Now, one little trick that I do, which might be useful to you, is if I'm giving a name to a cell, I know that I don't want to monkey with it later. I want to know that's got a name. Don't touch it. So I usually come over here to my Home tab, and I'm just going to give it some color. So just for me, visually to say, that is a named cell. And I might even put in the name of that cell. Okay, so having done that, what we can do next is we can say, all right, if that changes, we need to change the definition of the named range, which we have for grades or time 1. And there's a way to do that, fortunately. It's a little bit tricky, but here's how it works. So if we go up here to the Formulas tab, there's something called Name Manager. And Name Manager is going to show me all of the named cells and all of the named ranges that I've already established. It's going to give me the list of them. So we see that there's something called number of students, and its value is currently 3,108. Down below it says, what is it referring to? Actually, let's do it with time 1. Okay. So right now it is giving me some definition over here. Let me pull up a notepad. All right, and I'm just going to copy it out of there so you can see what it looks like. And I'll just paste it on my notepad in a great big thing. All right, so this is currently the definition of time 1. So what is it showing me? This is the name of the sheet where the cells are included. Don't worry about the dollar signs for now, but what it's telling us is that it is cell C2 through cell 3109. Well, it's that 3109 that needs to change if we add or subtract. So we're going to use a special function called offset. And this is the way offset works. So our command, our formula is called offset, and then we have a parenthesis, and then we're going to give it some parameters. We're going to indicate how the offset is going to work. The first parameter is going to be our starting point, then a comma, and then how many rows down. So how far, so if we start at one point, how many rows down are we going to go? Comma, and then columns across. So there are 3 parameters here that we have to tell offset. Where are we starting? And then from that point, how far down do we go? And how far across do we go? So this actually becomes very simple for us. So we know that the starting point is going to be S2. That's the first row. It's the ending point that's going to change. So I'm not going to do anything to change that. I'll leave that in place. But the ending point needs to change. So here's where it becomes very useful. Offset. So let's start building it. Offset. Our starting point is still that. I'm sorry. Yes, it's still that. It's that right there. Now, so that's our starting point. How many rows down do we go? Well, we want to go down according to the number of students. So no matter how many students are included, that's how many rows down we need to go to the bottom of this range. Well, we have a name for that, and it's called number of students. So if we take out some students, that number is less. If we add some students, that number is going to be more automatically, because there's already a formula called number of students in a cell called number of students. How many columns across? Well, we're only looking at that one particular column. So for the range of time, so we're not going to go across. We're not going to go more rows or columns to the right or more columns to the left. Just stay in that column basically and close it. So now that we've built our offset to indicate where is the ending point for that range, we can simply copy it, and instead of this being the ending point, that is our ending point. Whatever cell is referred to by that formula, that's going to be the ending point. So we're always starting in the same place here, and the ending point is going to be determined by this. Starting at that point, go down the number of students, and don't go right or left on the columns. Now, one hitch though, if we go down 3108, the first one down is going to be S3, then S4, and actually it turns out we're going to go 1 too many on the way down. It's going to go down to the next row, so I'm just going to subtract 1. So this right here should be the definition for time 1. All we've done is that the starting point's the same, but the ending point is going to change based on the number of students. So let's just copy it out of there. Now up here for time 1 definition, I'm going to just take that out and paste in my new formula. Okay, so, close. Do I want to save it? Yes. All right. So right now, time 1 starts at S2, and we know that it goes all the way down to S3109. But let's say I take out some kids. Let me just remove some kids. I'm going to just right click and delete those rows. Now, if I go to time 1, it should still go just to the bottom instead of having all those extra rows that no longer exist. And you see that they are in there. Same thing, if I add some rows, the range is also going to expand to include the new rows. Whew, okay. That's a little conceptual, a little bit heady, I know that, but it becomes very useful because it's just a very common thing that will happen. We have more kids enter our class. We have kids that leave the school or come into the school, or we have kids that didn't test previously and now they're testing. So we have new information. Well, naming your ranges is super important and super useful to make everything much more efficient and much more understandable. But the fact of the matter is, the number of kids that we're looking at is going to change. So we have to make sure that the ranges are also going to change. And that's how we do it. Okay, let's get out of this one, the big one. We've done enough here. Let's actually look at our small set. I'm going to jump over to sample data set small, because here we can just see everything. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and name some ranges here, because we're going to do a variety of analyses. We're going to do analyses around grades, around the number of tests, although that's all two, around their scores, the times, and all of that. We're going to use all of those for analysis. So the very first thing that I want to do is just go ahead and create my names now. So I know I'm going to do analysis around student grades. So I'm going to click here on the first one, which is B2, shift and down to select them all, and I'm going to call this student grades. So that range is now called student grades. And I'm going to change this up here just to remind myself what that's called. So I know we're going to use let's ignore number of tests. It's 2 for everybody. If I was going to do something, maybe some kids had 1 test, 2 tests, 3 tests, 4 tests, however many. If I was going to do some analysis around the number of tests, I would also give that a name. But we're not going to, so I'll skip it. We are going to do some analysis around score 1, time 1, score 2, and time 2. So same thing. I'm going to call this score 1, this range, up there in my name box, and enter. I know I'm going to do some analysis around time 1, so I'm going to rename that. And I know I'm going to do some here. This is going to be score 2. See, I can use a number in there, but it just can't be the first character. And I know I'm going to do some analysis around time 2, so time 2. Now the very simplest things that we want to do, obviously, is find out, did kids make any gain or not? What was the difference between score 1 and score 2? Is it any different? So now let's build a little formula. And this is just a completely simple little formula. All I need to do is subtract, right? So I'm going to look at score 2 and I'm going to subtract score 1 and see if there's a difference. So for my little formula, I only need to do it once, fortunately. So my formula is going to be equals, every formula, the value of the cell equals something. It's going to be score 2. I'll just click on score 2 and Excel will automatically put the reference in there. Minus, and I will click over here on score 1, and you see Excel automatically puts it in there. I don't need to put in the D2 and F2 myself. I just click on it and Excel does it for me. And enter. That student lost 10 points, which is probably useful to know. Now, I don't want to have to repeat writing that formula for every single cell. But fortunately, I don't have to. We've created something called a relative reference. So if we look at this, it says from this cell where we're putting our formula, H2, we're going to go back to the left 2 cells or 2 columns. And we're going to subtract the cell that's 4 columns to the left of this formula. So what we're basically saying is relative to where I'm typing my formula, in relation to where this formula is, go back 2 and subtract the value if we go back 4 from that point. So the cells being referred to are in a position relative to where I'm putting my formula. And I'll just enter there. Well, we want the next one to do the same thing. So if I just simply click on this formula here, and I'm going to use my shift arrow, not end, but just shift arrow to highlight down, and just keep going down to the bottom. I want to take that formula that's at the top and just replicate it all the way down. In Excel, that's called fill down. Fill down. And if you look up at the menu at the top, there's a place that says fill down up there under one of those tabs. It's not worth looking for because there's a shortcut. Control D. D for down, right? I think on the Mac, it's going to be the option D for control down. So I'm going to hold my control, put in D, and it's going to take whatever's at the top of that selection and fill it down to the bottom of that selection. So let's see if it worked. So we know this one's right. Well, now our formula is over here in H3, right? So let me open up that. Sure enough, it's referring to the column immediately to the left, 2 columns to the left, and 4 columns to the left. So the relative positions are the same. We've moved the formula so the cells to which it's referring also move because they are in the same relative position. So if we look at this one down here, which is H12, it's still referring to 2 columns to the left and 4 columns to the left. That is a very quick and easy way to take a formula and replicate it across multiple rows. Now you can also go across columns, or right or left. Control R will copy to the right, for example. But in this case, we're just going down the columns, so we need to go down, Control D. All right. So now we have all of our gains. Probably the most common formula that is used in Excel, and certainly used for student analysis, is a simple if-then formula. And here's what it looks like. Let's get rid of all of this. So this is going to be the if-then formula. And here's how it works. Start with an equal sign, as always. The formula is called if. So if, and now we have to put in some parameters. If what, right? What are we referring to? The first parameter is some condition to check. If some condition equals true, that's the first thing we do. Then we will do this. Then we will do something, comma, for the next parameter. Otherwise, do this thing. So that you see there are 3 parameters. First, we have some condition we want to see if it's true or not. If it is true, then we will do the second parameter. But if it is not true, then we do the third parameter over here. So in this case, we're going to say if, and we want to look at how much gain the students made, or if they made negative gain. So we're going to ask if the gain is less than 0, which means they lost points. Then we're going to do something. What are we going to do? Let's put in a word. That's not a very politically correct word, but it's short and easy to type. So because I want to put text in there, I have to put it in quotation marks. I could put a formula there. I could put a number there. I could say if they're less than 0, just put a 0 in that cell. But in this case, I want to put some kind of a text flag for me to say, oh, these are the students that did worse. Or let's just say worse. Maybe that's a little more politically correct. So if the gain is less than 0, put in the word worse. Otherwise, so question, now we go to the next parameter. We could put a number in there. We could put a formula in there. We could put a word in there. Or we could simply leave it blank. In this case, we are only trying to create a flag for those students who lost points. And that's all that I want to see there in this case. So if they gained points, I don't want to do anything. I only want some kind of an indication for the kids who did worse. So to indicate that nothing should go in the cell in that case, no number, no text, no anything, in order to indicate if the first condition is not true, don't do anything. And I will do shift, quote, quote. To indicate a nothing in a cell, it's just simply 2 double quotes. And now we close it. So I could put text in there, some text, right? And it would put the word some text in there. But in this case, the text that I'm putting in there is nothing. So that's what we need to do. So we need to figure out if the value in gain, which for this first student is -10, if that value is less than 0, put in the word worse. Otherwise, put in nothing. So that's our formula. So here under the column I, the no gain, equals if this value right here at H2 is less than 0, so that's the first thing, the condition to check, right? Now, to get our next parameter, comma, put in the word worse, another comma, because we're going to the next parameter, double quotes, don't do anything, and close it with a final parenthesis. So, check if H2 is less than 0. If that's true, put in the word worse. If it's not true, don't put in anything at all. And let's see what it does. It put in the word worse because this gain right here is less than 0. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just simply going to take that, copy it down, and Control D or Command D on a Mac to take that same formula and copy it all the way down. And right away, it tells me this student and this student right here both lost points. They did worse on the second test than they did on the first test. So I don't have to go through manually and look at each student. I only have to write one formula, copy it all the way down, and Excel will immediately tell me which students did worse on the second test. So let's say I've got a lot of students in here. I mean, right now I can just look at it and say, oh, two kids did worse, all right? But let's say I've got a lot and I don't want to have to spend the time to scroll and kind of manually count. Excel will do that for me. And it will do that using another type of counting function called COUNTIF. So what it's going to do is basically this. It's going to count the number of cells if they meet a particular criteria. So the first one we used was count A, count all the cells that have something in them. Now we're only going to say count the cells if they meet a particular criteria. And here's how it works. You know what? Actually, before we do this, let's make it even easier on ourselves. So this is the no gain column, right? Let's go ahead and give it a name. Now, you'll notice that I immediately selected that. If these were blank, we didn't have any formula in there, then it's going to go from I2 all the way to the very bottom of the spreadsheet, because it's going to go down and look for the next cell that has something in it. Okay? But in this case, even though these are blank, they do have something in them. They have a formula in them. So I can use that automated feature to select all of those rows at once. Because it's basically going to say start with the first row and then go to the last row before a blank space. So shift, end, shift, end, and down. And there we go. Let's give it a name. And since I've labeled it no gain, I'll just call it, let's do small case, no gain. So that range right there is now called no gain. So what I want to know is how many cells in the range no gain equal worse, equal the word worse. So looking at my little sheet, so I want to say equals count if the first parameter in this formula, and it's two parameters. The first one is, what's the range that we're looking at? Where are we going to apply this formula? Where are we going to do our counting? And we're going to do our counting in the range called no gain. And a comma, because that's the end. Now, if you don't have a name, then you have to actually put in whatever it is, I to through, and we use the colon to equal through I-19. So that's the range of cells I2 through I-19, right? But we've given it a name, which makes it so much easier. I just have to look at the range called no gain, because they are the exact same thing. All right, so count if, count if these cells in no range equal our certain parameter. And what parameter should they be? Do they equal the word worse? So what are we looking for? We're looking for that right there. Count if the cells in no gain equal or match this criteria right here. So let's try it. So I will just do it down here on I-20. I'll just put it there. Equals count if in the range no gain. See, it automatically highlighted it for me, so I know that to show me what's selected. And you'll also notice that in the formula itself, the words no gain turned blue, because Excel recognizes that as a named range. If I had mistyped it, no GIN, no gen, it doesn't light up, and it doesn't select the range, and the words don't change colors, because it doesn't recognize it. That's a good clue for me that I've made a mistake. And my mistake is that I misspelled it. So when I spelled it correctly, it selects the range, and the word no gain, the name in the formula, also changes colors. All right, so that's our first parameter. Look there, and now we put in the criteria. What are we looking for? And we're looking for the word worse. Close it with my ending parenthesis, and when I hit enter to enter that formula, it will tell me automatically how many kids did we flag as losing points on the second test. 2. which we knew because we could just look at it. But obviously, if we've got a much bigger data set, it would be very difficult to go through it manually. And again, if the range changes, we'd have to go back and do it manually every single time. And frankly, who's got time for that? I have no interest in doing anything manually if Excel can do it automatically. So let's just make it really show how easy this is. So here we've got our big data set. And I'm going to add a column right here. Let's see, insert column. Okay, flag, which is spelled flag on time 1. There we go. We're going to call that flag time 1. So let's do one more thing. Let's sort this by student ID. So let me come up here to my data tab, and I can use my automatic A through Z, which will, the automatic A through Z or automatic Z through A will only look at the first column. It will do sort by the first column, and then the second, then the third, then the fourth, and so on. It would work in this case because I just want to sort by student ID. But let's say I want to sort it by grades instead. If I don't want to start with the first column, I have to tell it where to do the sorting. And to do that, then I need to use my sort button, where I can tell it what to sort and first, what to sort second, and so forth. So, add level. I want to sort by student grades. And smallest to largest, that's fine. Then, so it'll sort all the data by student grades. First grades will be together, then second grades and third grades. And then after that, I want to sort it according to academic year. So all the first grades of the first year, then all the first grades of the second year. Then all of the second grades of the first year, second grades of the second year, and so forth. So I can do multiple levels of sorting, first sort, sub-sorting, and so forth. With these versions of Excel, I can actually have, I believe, 5 levels, which is kind of neat. It gives you a lot of options for sorting. So let's add a level. I click Add a Level. Then sort it by academic year. A to Z, Z to A to Z, fine. Okay, and now what it should do is put first graders at the top and the 2018s at the top also. Sure enough, there it is. First graders, and if I go down, see this is all 2018, and I go down a little further, a lot further because we've got a lot of kids. Oh, they're all 2018. Okay. Second graders, 2018. Ah, here we go. And after that, so here's second graders, 27 to 2018. And then after that, second graders 2019 through 2020. So it's sorted by the grades, and then within the grades, it's sorted by the year. All right, that's what we wanted. All right, so very simple now. We want to look at the amount of time each student spent and determine if it is above or below a certain value. We need to put a flag in here. So let's do this. Let's put our formula equals, and let me blow it up a little bit more. There we go. And scroll over a bit. All right, equals. If this is less than whatever number we choose, let's call it 20. If it's less than 20, then put in flag. Otherwise, don't put in anything, and down. Okay, so do I want to just hold down my cursor and drag all the way to the bottom? No, I do not, because that's too far to go. So instead, let's go from the bottom to the top. So if I start just dragging down, there's a really good chance I'm going to go past the bottom and just kind of go too far because it's going to be moving really quickly. So let's just use my scroll bar over here. Let's start at the bottom and go up. So we'll start here. And here, I don't even need to scroll. That's the bottom of the range, and it's selected. Now I will use my scroll bar to move right up to the top. And remember, Shift the Shift key allows us to select a range. And this actually works for Microsoft Word also. If I have something selected and then I Shift and click something else, it's automatically going to select the range in between those 2 points, from the place that's selected to the place where I Shift and click, because Shift selects a range. So I'm going to hold down my, oops, I did it wrong. Let's try that again. All right, so I'm going to select right here in T3098. While it's selected, scroll to the top, and then I am going to Shift and click on the top. And because I'm holding my Shift, it's going to select everything in between. Okay, so I've got the range selected. All I have to do now is fill down the formula, Control D, and every student that has too little time is now flagged. So that's a lot. You come all the way down to 3098. What I want to know is how many kids did I just flag? Well, let's start by naming the range. Let's call this flag time 1. Okay. Now that it's named, it's very simple. Equals count if flag time 1. If it equals the word flag, then count it. How many? We have 514 students that we just flagged as having too little time on the test. Very, very simple. So that's, okay, so as I mentioned at the very beginning, this is sort of a remake of all the stuff that we went through yesterday when my computer went wonky on me. I had nothing to do with it. But that's as far as we got, and maybe a couple of extra things as well that we didn't cover yesterday. So if you're coming back to look at this video, I hope that you found this useful. You can always skip ahead, skip behind, which is the great thing about video. But I've at least included in this video everything that we did yesterday afternoon in our first session. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy session 2 also. Have a great day.